Welcome back to the Wild West, to the show, to Bandit time. I'm your host, Bandit, the titular Bandit, and today I'm going to quickly revisit my 2022 redraft rankings. So if you are listening to this, or if you're watching this now on YouTube, I'm actually going to bring them up on the screen. And I just want to see what went right, what went wrong, and what can be gleaned as we head into our upcoming 2023 redraft leagues, our upcoming drafts here at the end of summer, at the end of August. So I'm pulling up my draft rankings here. I should be able to share them. Boom, they should be on the screen now. All right, so at the 101, last August, I ranked Justin Jefferson at the 101 over Jonathan Taylor. So patting myself on the back a little bit, considering Jettas is the 101 in this year's draft pool, and Jonathan Taylor was just granted permission to seek a trade and is sliding into the third round this season. I would say that's a dub for old Bandit to be ahead of the curve there. Now, I still had Jonathan Taylor ranked at number 2, but, and he did not live up to that projection. But what I like to do with my rankings in general is I like to push guys up or down based on where the consensus ADP currently is. And I'm primarily going to be pulling from the Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings, their redraft rankings. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to identify values of certain players and where it might make sense, to reach a little bit to try and get a guy that you really want, or to let a guy fall past ADP. And if it looks like a value at that point, go ahead and grab him. At the number 5 spot in 2022, I did have Travis Kelce, another major hit, but my next tight end that I ranked in my top 100 was Kyle Pitts at number 17 overall. A major miss. Yeah. Or was he? Let's think about this a little bit. Let's dive in. If I focus just on where I ranked my tight ends, just my tight ends in this 2022 top 100 redraft rankings, then I had Travis Kelce all the way up at number 5, Kyle Pitts at number 17. So, middle of the second round. That's where I was saying, he should be ranked, not necessarily where you should take him in a draft, but he could perform to that level. So Travis Kelce at number 5, Kyle Pitts at number 17, Dalton Schultz was my number 3 tight end at number 38 out of 100, Mark Andrews at number 39, TJ Hawkinson at number 55, Darren Waller at number 63, George Kittle at number 80, and Dawson Knox at number 86. So only 8 tight ends I ranked in my overall top 100 of 2022. And these rankings were meant to serve as an overarching ranking, regardless of the format. So, standard, half PPR, PPR, tiered PPR, best ball, whatever. Just in general, top 100. This is how I was feeling. Maybe the expert consensus is a little bit lower or too high, too bullish, too bearish on certain players. This is what I settle on as sort of an overarching top 100. So looking back, ranking Kyle Pitts at 17 and Mark Andrews at 39, it seems like I definitely should have flip-flopped those guys, in the rankings. But at least with Kyle Pitts, you knew pretty early on in the season that the breakout wasn't going to happen, that Arthur Smith was committed to running the ball, that he didn't trust Marcus Mariota to throw the ball all that much. I think there was a couple games where maybe Marcus Mariota only completed 9 passes. So not a lot of attempts there for Kyle Pitts. And then Pitts, he ended up getting hurt, missing time when Desmond Ridder took over the last couple of weeks of the season. So they did start to pass a little bit more with Desmond Ridder under center. That was really beneficial to Drake London, who looks really, Drake London and Kyle Pitts, they have a projected for a pretty strong target share this year. But I'm not talking about this year. I'm talking about last year. So point is, maybe you drafted Kyle Pitts, but you knew pretty early on into the redraft season that he probably wasn't going to be worth it. And he was out of your lineup and probably off your team. Maybe you were able to trade him. Maybe you cut him. But the point is, you already filled your tight end spot, your starting tight end spot in a standard league there with someone else, someone who is getting you points. Mark Andrews, though, on the other hand, he made me look like a goddamn fool, at least at the start. of the 2022 season. So I want to go ahead and switch my screen here on YouTube. I'm going to pull up his stats from last season. Let me see if I can figure out this action. Oh boy. Whoa, back to full screen. All right. Working out the kinks here, but I'll figure it out. So sharing the screen, boom, Mark Andrews. And there we go. It's pulled up. So Mark Andrews. Basically, what happened with Mark Andrews is he had 2 number 1 finishes at the position in the first 3 weeks of the 2022 season. He scored 28.9 fantasy points in week 3 and 25.7 in week 2. That's pretty good. And then he had a bit of a dud in week 4 against my Buffalo Bills, but in weeks 5 and 6, well, he had a silver and a bronze finish. He was the number 2 and number 3 fantasy tight ends during those weeks. We're talking 20 plus PPR points in each of those weeks. So through the first 6 weeks of the fantasy season, he finished 12, 1, 1, 41, 3, and 2 at the position. But then from week 7 on, he finished the weeks with the following point totals: 0.4 PPR points, 6.3 PPR points. Then he missed a week against the Saints in week 9. Then the Ravens had their bye in week 10. And then he scored a little over 12, then 11, then 9.4, 3.7, 6.1, 7.5 before finally getting back up to a tight end 3 finish on the week in week 17 versus the Pittsburgh Steelers with 19 fantasy points in your fantasy championship. But are you thinking you made the fantasy championship with Mark Andrews on your team? If he had an absolute dud of a second half of the season, basically had not helped you out since week 6. I don't think so. So basically, those totals between his September, early October blow up and the championship, they're not all that impressive. They're not going to get it done. And they definitely don't register as what you're looking to get from your second or third overall, second or third round pick as you build towards the fantasy playoffs. So there was a good chance you missed out on making the championship if you were relying on Andrews simply because of his upside and the amount of draft capital you used to take him back in the summer of 2022. You're kind of, you didn't lean into that sunk cost fallacy. You're just hanging on for that upside, and probably led you astray, probably didn't make the playoffs, or at least didn't make the fantasy championship week. Because, when I look at this, I'm just kind of scrolling through here. I mean, part of the reasons for my rankings fade of Mark Andrews, back last summer heading into the 2022 season was what I had been hearing all last offseason, which was a persistent drumbeat that Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator at the time who loved to run the damn ball, was going to get back to doing what the Ravens were best at least under him when he was calling the plays, and that was running the damn ball and running it a whole damn lot. J.K. Dobbins, who I ranked at number 42 overall in my top 100 rankings, which I will try to bring up again real quickly. I had him at number 42 overall in my top 100 as my RB17. So I was a little bit worried about him because he was returning from a pretty major, substantial injury. I believe he suffered that heading into 2021. Am I misremembering that? I think so. And he basically suffered that right before the 2021 season. The thought process was he was going to be back underway, ready for 2022. But it was pretty clear early on last year that he was not ready to come back. The Ravens, maybe J.K. Dobbins himself, I don't know who was to blame. Probably the Ravens. But hey, not trying to get sued here. Not trying to get sued. But he came back a little bit too early, ended up missing more time, did not have the season that anybody was projecting or hoping for. And then, of course, Lamar Jackson, he also got hurt. And when he went down, he was out for the rest of the season, which may be contract related, maybe not. Who cares? Lamar got paid. He deserved it. Great. This year, Mark Andrews is once again ranked as a second or third round draft pick, and depending on your format. And the Ravens are expected to be a bit of a pass heavier team with new offensive coordinator Todd Monken installing a faster-paced offensive system. So I'm a little bit higher on Mark Andrews this year. I feel more confident in his ability to return on that second or third round draft pick if that's where you want to take him. But I'm not talking about this year's ranks right now. I'm not. This is a rewind. I'm 10 minutes in. All right. Rewind. 2022. I think this is a good exercise where you can see some of the players that I was high on last year, that the community was high on last year. And you can kind of learn from that, I think, as we go into our drafts now. Like, basically, I had Cortland Sutton at 26th overall. Not great. That was a bet on Russell Wilson. And I think at that point we were saying Pete Carroll was an old man who liked to run the ball. We were wrong. Anyways, back to the rewind. One thing that really jumps out when I'm looking at this, 2022 top 100, and I'm not just looking at Cortland Sutton and how bullish we were on the Broncos. When I'm looking at this, I see, how many players I have in my top 20 specifically overall that have dropped as we enter 2023. So my top 20 picks in 2022, they have dropped so far down in the rankings of expert consensus rankings. Longtime fantasy staples I'm talking about, like Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara, Mike Evans, and James Conner can be found anywhere from round 3 to the middle or even the late middle rounds of your upcoming redraft leagues. And the theme there is, of course, aging running backs, aging players. And the general sentiment around the position, both in fantasy circles, specifically running backs, is they are riskier because they take more hits, have a higher injury risk, and are increasingly, they have become involved in committees. So 2 or 3 backs on every team, probably splitting up the workload to try to preserve that running back room's strength in a longer NFL season and hopefully into the playoffs. So the other aspect of that is also NFL contract circles, where many running backs are holding out or rightfully disgruntled with their lack of second contracts or comparative contracts versus secondary receiving options like your Allen Lazard or your Hunter Renfrow. They think they should at least be getting paid that much, probably quite a bit more. And yet they're kind of stuck due to the current collective bargaining agreement, unless they were to go on strike, for example. But, NFL teams, they're ruthless. They they got to put their team out. Everybody's job is on the line basically every week in the NFL. And they would just go out and they would find fresher, younger legs and likely be able to get replacement value from day 2 or 3 rookies or even UDFAs, undrafted free agent rookies, like we have seen in the past, like Jordan Mason last year, having a nice camp and then getting some run for the 49ers. Of course, there was James Robinson for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who's now bouncing around the league. But anyways, rooting for you, Jonathan Taylor. Get that money, get traded, come to Buffalo. Come on. Anyways, one running back I didn't have in my top 20, and I had all the way down at my number 37 overall in my top 100 of 2022 was Nick Chubb, who again immediately made me look like a fool in 2022, and he kept making me look like a fool just because he went off in 2022. He started on an absolute heater, racking up 15 plus PPR points in 9 of his first 11 games of the 2022 season. I want to bring that up real quick because it's just, I just want to, I just want to hurt myself here and just revisit Nick Chubb, his outstanding season and why I had him at running back 16. And that was just so foolish. And my buddy Roger is the biggest Nick Chubb fan I've ever met. And he was right. I was wrong. It's fine. All right. If you're watching on YouTube, I brought up his stats here and you can see them now. Basically, week 1 at Carolina, 15.3 fantasy points, a weekly finish of 19 with 15.3 fantasy points. So that's pretty good for the running back position. It would not hold that way for the rest of the year for the running back. But like I said, he started off on an absolute heater, topping 20 plus PPR points 4 times and 30 plus PPR points once in week 2. Finished as the RB1 overall that week against the Jets. And then This is all despite, and I'm highlighting it here on the screen, this was all despite seeing just, one target, three target, one target, three target, one target, two target, three target, one target, so on and so forth. Week 10, he had a season long high of four targets to that point during this monster stretch of PPR. So the reason for my relative fave pushing him down in my rankings was because he's not really a pass catching running back. At the time they had Kareem Hunt, he was filling that role for the Browns. Kareem Hunt has since moved on. So, anyways, I just want to stay in 2022 real quick. Sorry, bouncing around. Deshaun Watson, he began starting for the Browns at quarterback in week 13, and that's when Chubb's fantasy output plummeted. From week 13 to week 17, Chubb would fail to reach 15 PPR points in a single game. His highest scoring finish of the stretch did come in the fantasy championship week, where he delivered a mere 12.6 PPR points. Good for an RB20 finish on the week. Not what you want from your first round fantasy pick. Again, I know he probably got you to the fantasy playoffs, but in week 15, week 14, those first two rounds of the playoffs, leading up into the playoffs, week 16, he wasn't really doing it for you. And then in week 18, when the trophies were already being engraved for last year's fantasy champions, Chubb, he finished as the top RB in PPR scoring and saw a season high 6 targets. So he got 5 of those for 45 yards and a touchdown, and he ended his day with 23.2 fantasy points. Good for the RB1 finish that week. So I think here's the problem. All right, as we head into 2023, there has been a consistent drumbeat this offseason about Chubb getting more work in the passing game. And if that's the case, and he can see roughly 5 targets a game more often than not, more often than he received roughly 3 targets a game, and way more often than he sees just 1 target a game, then yeah, he could. He could end up finishing as one of the better backs in fantasy football in 2023 and justify using your first or second round turn pick on him in upcoming 2023 redraft leagues. But, that's where he's being drafted right now. And I just don't really feel comfortable with that because I want to add some context to Nick Chubb and his week 18 output. I think that's pretty necessary because Chubb's first target, it came basically. Let me just. Oh, I don't have this one pulled up. Sorry. Working through the kinks here, but Chubb's first target in that week 18 game, that came with 25 seconds left in the first half as the Browns hurriedly tried to put together a no huddle drive and just try to get points on the board. That drive ended with a Deshaun Watson fumble recovery and a whimper for 9 yards and no points. Chubb's next target didn't come until the fourth quarter with 10-11 on the clock, but it did go for a touchdown from 2 yards out. So that's 2 targets and 2 yards for a touchdown. So basically PPR points, you're looking at 7.2 there. Not bad, but kind of fluky. Touchdowns kind of fluky. Anyways, Chubb's remaining 4 targets all came on no huddle drives with 3:38 or less remaining in the game. And although Kareem Hunt spelled Chubb during these no huddle drives, it is worth noting that Chubb was the back they wanted on the field when it mattered most, as they were trying to come back against the Steelers down 14 points. It's also worth noting that Kareem Hunt saw 3 of his 4 targets earlier on in the game when the Browns were actually operating from a neutral game script, i.e., the Browns were calling their offense as they had intended, as it had been installed in that weekly game plan. They wanted Kareem Hunt on the field for those potential dump offs, potential running back routes. And I know Kareem Hunt, he's now out of town, and Jerome Ford, he currently has a hamstring injury. He's on the mend with a hammy, but I find it pretty suspect to project that Nick Chubb will all of the sudden, he'll just suddenly earn all of the targets that Kareem Hunt was getting in previous seasons for the Browns when it was that sort of 1A or 1 and 2 backfield with Chubb and Kareem Hunt. I also expect that the Browns are going to try and move the ball downfield in 2023 with Deshaun Watson, try to use his arm after an entire offseason with Deshaun Watson operating as their starter. And if he can return to form, a big if, as camp reports have noted, he looks like he's completely lost it. He's completely trash out there. That wouldn't really be great if they're if they're launching it downfield. That wouldn't be that great for Chubb's perceived PPR uptick, which is driving his expert consensus rate to around the 11, 12, 13, 14 pick in drafts right now. And one last potential thorn before I move on. One last potential thorn is Deshaun Watson had at least 6 rushing attempts in all but one of his starts for the Browns in 2022, which limits the rushing attempts and scoring opportunities for the running backs, of course, like Nick Chubb. And it's been well documented that in general, dual threat quarterbacks aren't that great. They aren't they're not the best bet to sustain meaningful PPR seasons for your fantasy running backs, as they tend to pick up the extra yards themselves versus dumping off to the running backs like somebody like a Phillip Rivers would have done in the past. They'll just go ahead and scramble around. Josh Allen will go and bulldoze his way for the first down. So I'm just not really seeing it for Nick Chubb this year. Sure, he could prove me wrong once again. He'll be the best pure runner of the football again, but I just don't see him suddenly becoming a PPR machine. Like I just don't see it. So a little tangent there, and I just want to before I get on out of here, I do want to I brought up the screen with my 2022 redraft ranks again, and I just want to note how much the youth has just skyrocketed. Guys that I had in the back half of my top 100, the 75 to 100 range, those guys have absolutely skyrocketed in expert consensus ranks this year. And I'm just wondering how much of that increase has to do, is it correlated with the increase in popularity of best ball as well as dynasty, where youth is at a premium? Because in best ball, youth is prioritized because of the tournament structure of some of these contests that are run on Underdog and DraftKings and the like, where basically the initial 14 regular season weeks are played out in an individual league of up to, say, 12 drafted teams. And of those 12 teams, the top 1 or 2 highest scoring teams from the first 14 regular season weeks will advance to week 15 into a new 12-team league. They will both go into, different new leagues, and then they have to win again. But the key there is that in week 15, you might advance, but now you might be in a league where there's other teams that have the same players as you, because, you advanced into that league. You're one of the highest scoring teams through the first 14 weeks. There's a good chance some of those players you needed to advance are going to be on other teams. So just say, like, basically a team could have a Mahomes-Kelsey stack, all right? And so if you want to bet on younger rookies to fill out your roster when you're doing these best ball drafts, the thinking is that to differentiate yourself from the other teams who would advance in the tournament setting, those other Mahomes-Kelsey teams, the younger rookies who you could possibly get later in drafts, the rookies who are more likely to be brought along slowly by their NFL coaching staffs and earning meaningful snaps at the end of the season, while also having, this is pretty crucial, while also having better odds of being healthy at that time because, they weren't seeing as much game action or live to make your lineup, given that lack of early season playing time. You might want to prioritize these rookies in your best ball drafts because they could be the guys that you need to differentiate yourself if you are going up against some other, your Mahomes-Kelsey team against 3 other Mahomes-Kelsey teams. You're hoping that late rookie you drafted is going to be the difference to help you advance from week 15 to 16 to 17, something like that. Just hoping. So when you look at the rankings on Underdog or on DraftKings, you'll notice that a lot of the rookies are pushed up there versus, say, Sleeper or ESPN or Yahoo or something like that. They're a lot higher in the average draft position just because there's a bet there from this tournament perspective that these are the types of guys you need to actually win the big money. Whereas if you're looking at it from a redraft perspective, guys like James Conner are going to be higher because James Conner is going to get you points. He's just going to rack up the points. But in best ball, the thinking is James Conner has a bit of an injury history. He might be one of the true bell cow backs this year, and he might not be healthy by the time the tournament comes around. So he's a bit faded in the best ball ranks. So I don't know. I see just when I'm looking at my 2022 top 100, it's a little shocking just to see how much the expert consensus ranks have pushed up these younger players who might not be the guys right away. They've pushed them all the way up into the first 2 rounds, second, third rounds, versus the traditional point getters, the vets. Like your James Connors, like your Chris Godwins, guys like that, guys who the Zoomers might call older, dustier players, and they're like 26 or something like that. Still viable in redraft. Just keep that in mind, particularly if you're in a league that likes to trade. I like to look at players that might have a perceived weaker schedule in the first 3 weeks. And then I like to look at, weeks 4 through 6, see what kind of matchups are coming up, because you can still get these guys who are going to get a lot of points for you. All right. You can do it. I'm not going to talk about the rest of the 2023 takes today. I feel like I was kind of all over the place in this. My mind was turning, the wheels are turning. I hope your wheels got a little bit turning. But yeah, I'll be back later on to sort of help strategize for upcoming 2023 drafts. But I hope this was somewhat informative. I hope looking at this top 100 redraft list that I have here, maybe some names will jump out for you and just kind of be like, oh yeah, we really were high on, so-and-so last year. Like my number 49 player was Trey Lance out of 100. Whoops. What can you do? All right. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.